Welcome, everyone. We're thrilled that you're joining us today for this CCRC webinar. My name is Hannah Lahr. I'm a researcher at the Community College Research Center. The topic for today's webinar is funding guided pathways reforms. And we're sharing findings related to two big questions. How much will guided pathways cost? And how can colleges fund and sustain these large-scale reforms? Before we get started, I'd like to give a big thank you to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and to the Kresge Foundation for supporting CCRC and this research. So the webinar today is going to start with a short presentation of our research, followed by a panel discussion with three college leaders. To kick us off, I want to introduce Jenkins, Senior Research Scholar at the Community College Research Center, who will give an overview of the main findings of our research. After Davis's presentation, I'm going to introduce our panel and then ask them a few questions about how they approached funding guided pathways and how their institutional context and perspective informs their work and what lessons we can learn from them. So Davis, I'm going to kick it over to you.
Thanks, Hannah. So the guided pathways reforms have become a movement nationally. These are over 300 colleges that are part of formal state and national guided pathways reform efforts. And we know many others we hear from others on a weekly basis that are trying to do it on their own. In the past 5 years, CCRC has been studying 120 implementation of pathways at 120 colleges across the country, and answering questions that are emerging from this work in the field. As those of you know who have done this, guided pathways involves major changes to sort of the conventional community college education model that emerged out of the 1960s. Colleges are redesigning programs and student supports in fundamental ways, starting with the end in mind, the end being good jobs and further education that students need to advance, and backward designing programs. So colleges are undertaking major changes in 4 areas. They're clarifying paths to student goals by backward mapping all programs from good jobs directly or transfer with junior standing in the student's major field of interest. Very importantly, instead of the traditional, transfer versus CTE or credit, non-credit, they're organizing programs by field to facilitate student exploration in a field and ideally in an academic and what will become for them an academic and career community. Very significantly, they're really redesigning the new student experience to help students get on a path. They're helping all new students, including ideally high school dual enrollment students, adult ed students, and others, explore their options and interests, connect with faculty, other students in a field of interest, and we're finding that this is extremely important, and especially now in the COVID area, and make a purposeful, at least initial program choice, get a direction. They're replacing prerequisite remediation in algebra and English composition with teaching students to be effective learners in college-level program foundation courses, not just English and math, but anatomy and physiology, accounting 101, American civilization, the Civ 101, the tough program foundation courses. And ideally, they're ensuring that students have a light the fire learning experience in term 1. This is particularly important for equity purposes, that underrepresented students, benefit by having challenging but really well-taught courses. And they're helping all new students develop a full program plan. And then they're keeping students on the plan or helping them make corrections by organizing advisors by field. Not having generalists, they may have some generalist advisors, but some advisors are organized by field. So you have an advisor for STEM programs. And those advisors are helping monitor students' progress, and the college is scheduling students' courses based on the courses on their plan so that they're available when they need them. And finally, and I think this is sort of a next frontier for many colleges, they're really supercharging learning, not just in courses, but across programs by helping introduce students to these so-called 21st century learning skills, critical thinking through project work in courses, and ensuring that students gain program relevant experience. So these are big changes that colleges are making, and they've been doing this in a period when state funding in many places has been diminishing. And so college leaders are asking these questions justifiably. How much is all this going to cost? What are the initial and ongoing costs? How are colleges funding these, given that we're haven't been showered with money, at least most of us coming in last several years. Fiscal challenges are tight. Enrollment in many cases is challenging. Is this providing a good value, or is this benefiting students in the college as a business? And then how can we plan for this in our own colleges? How can we estimate the costs and plan for this? So the first product that we've put out is a technical report by our colleague Clive Belfield, in which Clive did cost research to try to quantify the costs of guided pathways research. And here are his estimates, which he based on the ingredients model, which doesn't use college budgets, because college budgets don't say, well, this is the budget for guided pathways reform. He looks, and we've looked at what are the actual changes colleges are implementing over and above business as usual, and then pricing those changes and enhancement improvements. And then he comes out with this estimate, which is for an average community college of about 4,000 FTE, which is close to the average enrollment for community college, and about a $60 million annual operating budget. And he estimates the implementation costs, the startup costs over 4 years, and then after that, the annual operating costs. And he looks over 4 years, because this is typically the length of time we see it takes to implement, and estimates that over 4 years, it costs this average community college about $7.1 million, which translates to about $450 per year per full-time equivalent student. This is about 3% of the general operating budget for these colleges. And then the annual operating budgets, you can see, are somewhat smaller in that second column. The largest cost initially and ongoing is to hire advisors to allow case management advising by field. And we'll talk about that. But there are also costs to involve faculty and staff in mapping paths to jobs and transfer paths and keep those up to date. There are IT investments in websites, online catalogs, academic planning, software, case notes for advisors to keep track of students and communicate among advisors, counselors, faculties, and the like. And some colleges are implementing software for class scheduling, so to optimize the number of courses students can take on their plan when it works for them. Colleges starting up are also, in some cases, hiring or providing release time for staff to coordinate these efforts. And there's a lot of teaching and professional development and training from the start in the startup and continuing on, because this is really doing things very differently for colleges. And Clive estimated these for different types of colleges. I guess the key thing here is that there are some economies of scale for larger colleges, and the costs are going to be somewhat higher, according to Clive's estimates, for smaller colleges. The second piece is more of a practitioner-oriented guide, because in which we looked at 6 colleges or 6 institutions across the country because while Clive, produces this sort of idealized estimate based on an average community college, in fact, the financing and the approach of different colleges, different situations varies by where they are and by college. So we picked these 6 institutions, which include a small college like Cuyahoga and Jackson, to large urban college like, small college like Cleveland State in Tennessee. Sorry, Bill. Get mixed up with the Clevelands. A large urban college like Cuyahoga, and two districts, Alamo Colleges, which is a 5-college district, and Pierce College, which is a 2-college district in Washington, and then Bakersfield College in California, because like a lot of things, financing community college is very different in California. 4 of these are collective bargaining institutions, for those who wonder whether this can be done with unions, and it can, although they've involved their unions and their faculty leadership and other leaders from the start. 4 in performance funding states. So we tried to look in different, funding and fiscal environments. So, our panelists are going to get into these questions in more detail, but in general, we find that colleges, most of the colleges we looked at did try to secure and secured grant funding for the startup activities like engagement, program manning, mapping, planning, and capacity building. A lot of colleges are using Title III and Title V grants. When you look at the recent, most recently awarded Title III and Title V by the U.S. Department of Education, many of them are guided pathways colleges. But by and large, they're relying as much or not more, and again, you'll hear this from our panelists, on reorganization, reassignment, and reallocation than on raising new income, because of course we've been in a period where there isn't a whole lot of new income. In terms of reorganization, colleges are organizing transfer and CTE under the same meta major or field, under the same deans. Some cases, both credit and credit or non-credit are also part of those. They're reassigning students or staff and other resources. In particular, I mentioned this, embedding advisors in meta majors so that you can provide case management advising within the field. And they're reallocating existing resources. When Dr. Alex Johnson got to Cuyahoga Community College in 2014, he found 90 separate student success initiatives that were taking up a lot of resources, and this feeling that there was sort of initiative fatigue. He stopped those and redeployed the energies on more systemic changes around early career advising, advising by meta majors, student plans for all students, and was able to save in this last year, those kind of savings generated about $6.4 million in fiscal year 21, or about 2.3%, over 2% of their operating budgets that could be reallocated, reinvested in student support initiatives. So colleges in general are moving from small efforts to strategic efforts, and they're starting to see benefits for students. All of these case study colleges have seen improvements in early momentum and credit course taking by students. 4 of the colleges that were early adopters have seen market improvements in graduation rates. Colleges have seen reduction in non-degree applicable credits, which is a big value for students. Bakersfield, for example, went from an average of 85 credits for associate degree graduates in 2015 to 75 in the most recent, and they're seeing more and more evidence that students are taking fewer non-program courses. Doing these things have made them much better prepared for COVID. Adelina Silva, who's Diane Snyder, who you're going to hear from Alamo Colleges, the Vice Chancellor for Student Success, said that because every student has an advisor in their field, when COVID hit, when the college had to shut down, the colleges had to shut down their campuses, every student still had the advisors, and they implemented a campaign such that the program advisors reached out and conducted over 1 million personalized contacts with students in their field, not just a generic advisor, but Davis, this is your criminal justice advisor contacting you, seeing how things are going. And for summer and fall registration, every student is on a plan, and that drives registration. And so that their registration for classes wasn't really affected by COVID. So this really helped the college make that pivot. And in general, all of these colleges have sort of adopted guided pathways as a way of doing business. Sonia Christian says that guided pathways is the infrastructure for how we do business at Bakersfield College. And instead of budgeting separately by academics, student services, and administration, they're budgeting collaboratively. And in the case of Bakersfield College, where, as with other California colleges, you have these categorical funds that enable you to invest in innovation, Bakersfield is combining these or merging these, not just the guided pathways funds, but the equity funds, the strong workforce funds, and other categorical funds to implement these changes. Bottom line is that community colleges, these colleges, are really adopting not just a new education model, but a new business model where from generating enrollments by offering low-cost college courses to generating enrollments by and retaining students by offering affordable programs that have value because they lead efficiently either to a good job or to transfer with junior standing in a major. So now to hear from folks who've led this kind of major change, I'm going to turn it back to Hannah.
All right, thank you, Davis, for that overview. And to our audience, please send us some questions in the Q&A as we're going along. We're going to have a few minutes at the end to take some of your questions. And if we're not able to address them during the webinar, we will try to follow up with you afterwards and send you answers to your questions. So before we jump into our panel, I want to introduce everyone. So we have Dr. Bill Seymour, who's the president of Cleveland State Community College in Cleveland, Tennessee. CCRC has been working with Cleveland State since around 2015, first through Pathways work in Tennessee, and then as part of the AACC Pathways project. So Bill will be able to speak from the perspective of leading a small and rural serving college. And we're also thrilled to be joined by Diane Snyder, the Vice Chancellor for Finance and Administration in the Alamo Colleges District in San Antonio, Texas. So the Alamo College District includes 5 colleges, all of which are implementing pathways reforms as a district. So Diane will be able to speak from the district and the larger college perspective. And finally, we're joined by Charles Ansell, who is currently the Vice President of Research, Policy, and Advocacy at Complete College America, and formerly the CFO of the New Hampshire Community College System. So Charles will be able to speak to the system-wide and also the policy perspective. So welcome, everyone. All right, so we're going to kick off our panel discussion with a few questions about the major costs involved in implementing guided pathways. So Bill, Cleveland State is a small community college with a fall 2018 enrollment just over 3,000 students. And as I mentioned, you've been implementing guided pathways since 2015 or so. So what have been the main costs of implementing pathways at Cleveland State?
All right, well, thank you for that question and good afternoon, everybody. But before I talk about a few of those major costs, I just got to say, Davis, if you had shown me that chart of cost before we got started, we probably never would have got started.
That's why I didn't show it to you, man.
Yeah, well, good, because to be quite honest, it's a leap of faith in many ways. It's an institutional commitment. And for us as a small college and having declining enrollments during those years and state budget cuts, we didn't have extra money to help make this happen. And so it really is a matter of prioritizing and making that happen throughout the college. But so we did lots of things that didn't cost money. So for example, our faculty engaged in developing their program maps. We dedicated an in-service 1 August to that. and they knocked it out. We didn't pay for that. Now, some other schools might do that. So it's going to be different from school to school. But as we got into it more and implemented our success coach program, for example, we needed to make sure we staffed that. And we put together 8 success coaches. We did repurpose some staff from other departments and obviously put them through intensive training. But we also had to fund some new. So sometimes we used an open position and repurposed that. We used some grant money up front to kind of get started. But then actually, as we saw increases in enrollment, gains in revenue, gains in performance funding, we're able to dedicate some of that money and round out that staff to make sure that that was staffed on a permanent basis. One of the other things that we did early on is we established a Center for Dynamic Instruction. This is your teaching and learning center, and hired a director for that program. And they became instrumental in helping all the other faculty develop some of the skills and practices that were going to take place across the campus. So those are a couple that really stood out for us in terms of new costs. But we really managed it by prioritizing within the college budget. It's not that we added to our budget, that we just shifted our resources and put them towards our priorities.
Great, thanks, Bill. So Diane, what have been the largest costs associated with implementing guided pathways in the Alamo colleges? And were there different costs in the beginning versus now that the college is several years into the work?
Yes, thank you. For us, as you know, as it was in the introduction, we are a very large college system with 5 individually accredited colleges in San Antonio area, and support over 60,000 students, close to 70 now at this point. But when we started this journey, as was mentioned, we really needed to free up resources internally to really feed moving to a case management advising system, because that is huge for us. At scale now, we have like 250 people supporting that effort. And so what we were able to do in the early years, in 2015, we did a retirement incentive that we went very intentional, knowing that we'd accumulated some excess resources in certain areas, even certain programs with faculty as programs had changed, all of our student support areas and other areas. So we needed to really incent folks to go ahead and perhaps retire, allow us to redeploy and take some of those vacancies and reskill even existing people that didn't retire and move them to this initiative. So in the early year, we actually took 93 positions that we were able to not fill some of the retirement vacancies and move them to be certified advisors and hire there. Also redeploying, prioritizing, as was mentioned, on student success support, that we had lots of smaller initiatives throughout our colleges. And when we lined up with all 5 colleges moving the same way with this case management advising, and we took and mapped all of those students support personnel, and in many cases put them through intense year-long training to upskill them to be able to do certified advising. So that was redeploying with 93. Now on top of that, over about 3 years, to get us from a 900-to-1 ratio of students to advisor to the 350-to-1 ratio, we had to add 115 positions. So it wasn't all just retirement incentive and moving. We did have to put some dollars behind it. Initially, that was $7.1 million to support about 60,000 students. We then initially focused in phase 1 with advising students after they enrolled. That was our core group. Then in the subsequent years, starting in fiscal year 19, we started investing heavily to add even more advisors. We added 43 more to add to the upfront process. We call it enrollment coaches. So to really be dealing with when potential students are making decisions on what we offer and where it's going to go and whether they're going to come to us, that we also intentionally had the right skill set there to use the transfer advising guides, to use all this information to give them the best advice. So I would say right now, the lion's share of our funding is advising. If I look back as a baseline to 2015, what we were spending for a generalist type model to where we ended up, it added just under 10 million that we invested in this strategy. On top of that, the pathways work, we invested 1.1 million. And that was to really do some intentional faculty release. We put 4 personnel originally into that area to do all of these transfer advising guides, backwards mapping from our key transfer universities, all of their programs to try to ensure that our courses would count as degree applicable. Huge amount of work. We then added to that to actually start centralizing that work with 8 people. And so now our recurring cost is about $700,000 to support just the care and feeding of the transfer advising guys, staying current with every change a university does, backwards mapping, yet staying with oversight and representing our students who might transfer and be told, oh no, that's not going to count. That we have the MOU agreements with the universities and a little bit of teeth in it that we can go back and negotiate on behalf of our students. So that's been wonderful work, and it has been expensive. And I know we've had multiple ways that we funded it, which may be a later question.
Great, thanks, Diane. I appreciate all those details that you were able to provide. Charles, from your time in New Hampshire, when you were the CFO, the system there, the colleges were implementing pathways. What were the main costs that that the colleges there had as they were going through this work?
Yeah, so going off of what Diane and Bill said and off Davis's presentation, I mean, I think it's very important to note at the outset, right, that like, yes, this is a big change to your business model, but that's only a change to your budget in as much as it's reflecting a total change to your strategy to student success, right? So what we saw is an entire reframing and restructuring of how we even, go about our budgeting instead of going from, just straight up carrying costs forward from prior years, going into like more of a zero-based model. But, I think I'd be remiss to just not mention at the very upfront, right, that these are changes that saw significant increases in our graduation rates, right? Both in New Hampshire, as well as, prior to that, when I led student success at the City College of Chicago, it happened there as well. It's because it's embraced as a wholehearted change to how you do things. And that's what we're seeing at Complete College America across our alliance in terms of states that are implementing things like this. In terms of like the main cost drivers, I struggle to answer that without going into, some of the details, because there's so much to pathways, making sure that students are really purposeful in their choice, that it's really structured, that there's a lot of momentum in terms of getting through developmental education quickly, and that there's a whole lot of support. I guess that the largest costs are things that Bill and Diane hit on and that Davis hit on in the presentation, but it's in advising. So a lot on that like support and structure. So for example, when it comes to things like the first 2 categories, like making sure students have really strong purpose and making sure that there's a lot of momentum as they're going down their pathway, there was cost there, but it wasn't, tremendously expensive, right? So for example, career advising, we introduced new technology and more professional development for advisors to be able to make sure that students are creating career goals, professional goals, and lining up academic pathways in service of those. In developmental education, we introduced at New Hampshire as well as in Chicago, co-requisite-based remediation, which had a little bit of a startup cost and a little bit of an annualized cost in terms of having sections attached to classes that students might be getting for free. But the bigger costs were on advising. And I think that it's important to think about how, to answer your question, particularly the second part about larger and smaller colleges, right? When it came to advising, we tended to think of it as like a lowercase a, right? So it wasn't just academic advising, but financial advising, financial aid, student affairs, job families. And the more that we could, I don't want to say consolidate because there weren't like jobs that were lost, but the more that we could get more functional representation and more generalist knowledge at the forefront, the more quickly you could have discussions about financial aid and satisfactory academic progress, as well as being on a strong educational plan, mapped semester by semester, without having to go to, being tossed back between functional areas. Another very important point in that is technology. One thing that was, critical is we implemented, and I'm not, pushing any given tool. But just to give an idea of what we did in New Hampshire, we implemented EAB Navigate for academic advising. There's, many products on the market that do this, but it's very important to not just make semester by semester maps that students can traverse, but they need to actually register onto those plans. And that has this ancillary effect of making sure that students who don't see an advisor are still registering onto academic plans. And that not only makes sure you get a lot of coverage as sort of like a cost trade-off because you have to invest so much in your advising function, but it also really set us up well for the COVID-19 pandemic because it made a lot of the GPS practices embedded into a new online normal that in some respects had been present. Just by way of kind of recapping, what I would say is, I think, actually, I'm not going to recap. Instead, I'm going to use my very limited time to add 2 more points. I think the large and small colleges, and again, I'm saying this from the role of the CFO of the system, I believe it's actually in a CCRC paper that's before this one, but by Clive Belfield, I think, and maybe Tavis. I apologize, Tavis, if I missed your authorship on this. There's this difference in modeling out efficiency of operations between technical efficiency and allocative efficiency, right? So you can be very technically efficient, like making sure that you have a strong metric like cost per completion. If, to Bill's point, if you're a little nervous about biting this all off, if you see the slides Davis just shared, well, try to come up with a metric like cost per completion or something like that that you can rally around for efficiency purposes. But then as the CFO of a system, or if you're not, like, lobby correctly, but make sure that smaller colleges that can't be as technically efficient because they can't have large class sizes, make sure that there is strong pushes to have the funding model be equitable to smaller colleges, such that people aren't underserved based on the community that they're in.
Hannah, could I say one quick thing?
Please.
Talking a lot about costs and more costs and more costs, but I think it's important to realize that there are savings to be had as well as efficiencies. For example, when we developed our Success Coach program and they became our one-stop people, no longer one-stop shop, one-stop people, they handle everything, including financial aid. So we're able to reduce our staff in financial aid and processors and things of that nature. And so that allowed us to reallocate those funds. But really the most important thing is if you can kind of get a sense of what your return on that investment is going to be. So Davis, it could be another chart. What did colleges gain? What additional revenue did they gain to offset that expense? I think could really help people see the whole picture.
Can I add to that really quick?
You're getting off script, huh? But...
Yeah. The return on investment is so huge, right? So one is, you actually need to model that out. And I admit that that's not something that we really did a ton in New Hampshire. I mean, we did a little bit on the EAB Navigate implementation, but like, what is the return on enrollment? I mean, if you look at the things that I was talking about earlier in terms of like low cost on career advising, students who don't get career advice don't feel as engaged with their program of study, and they're more likely to drop out. So if you try to like figure out what the costs are of every reform and then divide it by some sort of simulated completion that you're expecting to see, you might be able to get a decent return. Also, Davis hit on this on the presentation, but I want to be like really clear about it. We did start at several colleges to take the academic planner data and use that to inform the schedules. And that's so important because, this is what we see across many institutions in the CCA Alliance, and certainly was true in New Hampshire, is that 80% of costs are payroll. And so increasing your class size, not so much so that it denigrates the student experience, but, combining up sections that are like 3-4 people by using the demand data to determine your supply of courses instead of the other way around, that's a critical return, and it more than makes up for the costs, at least in our experience.
So I want to follow up on one point Bill made. So, as part of our research, we did find that a lot of colleges raised some grant funding to kind of support the initial startup, and you had raised some money to support the success coaches that you mentioned, but then you eventually were able to cover those success coaches as part of your regular college budget. So can you talk a little bit about how you did that?
Well, it really stems from our strategic plan, which we did kind of at the same time we were developing our pathways work. And so we had our priorities pretty well identified, and we stuck to that. So when we went through our budgeting process each year, we knew that those are things we wanted to fund. And even though we might not have had some additional funds early on, we knew we needed to make that investment. So we had to make some tough choices about what we're going to spend our money on, and might have to make some reductions here or there. But it really is an intentionality of financing your limited resources on those things that you believe are going to have that return on investment. And for us, it took about 3 years to see that growth. And by the third and fourth year, we actually saw the largest percentage increase in our state system, while our retention rates increased. And so not only do you get the additional revenue from the tuition, but the funding we get from the state of Tennessee is 100% performance outcome funded. And we had some of our largest years of new funding coming in from that. So there is a payoff to what you invest early on that allows you to put things to scale.
And Diane, could you also address this question a little bit about the benefits of guided pathways for students and the college, and what evidence you've seen at the Alamo Colleges that guided pathways has created an economic value for your students and for the colleges as businesses?
Certainly. One of the things that we regularly bring to our Board of Trustees, especially when they're making decisions about how we allocate funds, including our budget strategically, is we do look at a return on investment really from a student side. So when we looked at the benefits of all of these initiatives, it was multifaceted. We've quantified that our students on average saved $1,000 by avoiding excess hours while they were with us, because we were reducing the amount of hours they were taking with us to what they really needed to take, being very strategic, early on decisions of where they're going to transfer, what their plan is. All of that had direct benefits to our students. And we saw that our average hours dropped for 92 back in 2015 that students might be racking up to 82. And those with us, because some come to us with some hours, was 66. So we made a huge difference. And our 3-year graduation rate went from 9% to 30%. And we know that has direct value to students. On the pathways work, so here they save money with us. Now the pathways and the transfer advising guides and degree applicable courses that transfer from us being degree applicable and not retaking that at university, we've also seen a huge benefit there. We've done 901 transfer advising guides with 20 universities, 342 workforce development plans that we built to date. 654 of those pathways of those with the universities have less than 3 semester credit hour loss now. And our state average was 24 semester credit hours lost. So it's a huge benefit. That actually equates to, depending if it's a private university or public university, between $9,000 to $52,000 of savings to students of not having to pay that additional amount when they get to the university. And then, as was stated here, I think, for the business for us, all of these things you would think, well, we're losing money because they're taking less hours with us. But we were growing enrollment. We had increased persistence. We had the enrollment was still growing during this, even though the average hours was less. That then brought more tuition, which it's $1 million for every 1%, really, for us. And in addition, we get student success points for part of our state funding. So all of it made total sense, bottom line, and it was all just being more purposeful on an institution that was somewhat fragmented on our strategies to being all aligned on exactly what we were going to do and seeing that direct benefit.
Awesome, thanks, Diane. Bill, did you have anything to add to, Diane mentioned how even if, there wasn't any loss in funds from students taking fewer credits or concerns about that. I don't know if you had anything to add on that. Oh, you're muted, Bill.
Yeah, kind of similar for us. We saw a reduction, in the number of hours overall that they're taking. And so there's a much greater efficiency with that. But in our key performance indicators, to see that more students are taking 12 to 15 hours a semester, but also students completing their math and English and writing, all those things earlier. And so it builds a strength, I think, within the student to have a greater expectation for completion. And so there really is a mindset change. I think that happens for students when they're being more successful, they're taking classes, and they have the ability to graduate earlier than expected. So it really has resulted in increased enrollments based upon increased in retention, but also the performance funding has increased as well.
Great. So I want to move to another set of questions about sustaining the student success agenda in a challenging environment. So Charles, I had a question for you. What advice would you have for colleges on how to communicate with state policymakers about what they're trying to achieve with implementing this type of whole college reform, and how to best invest limited state resources in order to enable colleges to sustain and improve guided pathways and other types of systemic student reform work?
Yep. So first, first I actually want to go back to something that the thing that Bill and Diana were just talking about in terms of seeing return on things that would supposedly you would think are more costly, and it'll tie into my answer to your question. So I mean, I just want to be really emphatic on this point that anything that you might suspect you're ending up losing revenue, you suspect you would lose revenue because students aren't taking courses because they're able to get through more quickly, whether it's reducing credits on the total program of study, whether it's prior learning assessment and credit for competency, whether it's co-rec remediation, so you're not in a traditional dev ed path. All of these things, like, you have to do, like, you can't not do them because you might think that they cost more. This is like vital for student success, right? Now, incidentally, they all lead to dramatic retention increases. You find me like one study for any of those where it doesn't pay back in terms of the students coming back, being more excited, and actually completing their degree. So, I mean, it is a happy marriage that the bottom line in terms of profit does marry the mission. And I think that that goes into how you have to approach, talking with policymakers. I mean, in New Hampshire, we lobbied the legislature and the governor frequently, and we, New Hampshire has a history of not having the largest state appropriations, and I would say that in recent years that has really changed. And I think part of it is you can't beat around the bush. Like, you have to, be very upfront, especially in terms of COVID, right? During this time. What am I trying to say here? I believe something like nationally, there was like an Inside Higher Ed piece today or something where something like employees, there's been like a 14% reduction in employees at universities and at colleges across the country since the pandemic started, right? And higher ed already has a target on its back, right? There's been so many recessions since 1980. And every time there's just more disinvestment and no reinvestment. And to me, and to, I suspect, many people on this call, that is totally insane, because even though you have to make budget cuts, the last thing you should be doing is cutting the thing that saves your economy, right? Like, I'm trying to think of a good analogy. I mean, it would be like saying, okay, we're at war, so we need to save our money, so let's cut from funding the army, right? Like, higher education solves structural unemployment. And so then you need to make clear how you're doing that. And I think that there's this major myth that higher education is inefficient. I mean, there are efficiencies to be gained for sure. I mean, that goes into everything CCRC is written about and all the stuff that we're doing around guided pathways. But again, going back actually to some CCRC lingo around technical efficiency versus allocative efficiency, technically, we can be more efficient by doing things like the guided pathways efforts and making sure that students are getting through and quickly and on time and structured and supported. But then you have to show how you're doing that. So then that way there's allocative efficiency from the state's perspective. So they give more money to the exact thing that solves the economy, any structural employment problem. So I guess just to bottom line it, I would say that it's absolutely critical at this time to make that case very emphatically, because higher ed always has a target on its back, because policymakers know that they can raise, that higher ed has this lever of being able to raise tuition. But if you keep raising it, student demand is elastic at a certain point, and you're going to lose your ability to save your own labor economy.
Thanks, Charles. Diane, just to follow up on that, so with likely cuts in state funding and continued uncertainty about enrollments, though I do know Alamo Colleges is doing pretty well on enrollments even now. What strategy are you pursuing to ensure you're going to be able to continue to sustain and improve the guided pathways reforms at Alamo?
Okay, yes, thank you. I think for us, the real difference maker for us to keep it, to be able to sustain this program is we did the internal work. That's reallocating everybody, that's being strategic in these intentional interventions with students, with our case management advising. But it's also doing this work with the Texas Higher Education and Coordinating Board, increasing visibility with our legislature, that the pipeline isn't working between community colleges to universities. This intentional work on these transfer advising guides, we went kind of beyond. We learned early on we couldn't start from our side. We had to go figure out all of the degree requirements at these universities for all these degrees and backwards map it and have faculty to faculty talking. And as we did that work, it was figuring out that there was this myth out there that the state required the universities to accept the core 42 hours at least. And what was really happening is the core was considered optional. It wasn't degree applicable in many cases, and there was no visibility to that. So we've done a lot of intentional advocacy work to say we've really got to increase transparency on what is counting, what isn't counting, why it isn't, and getting that pipeline to work. And that's where then we can really help the entire system and get to the outcomes of an educated workforce, both going directly into the job and into transfers. So I think that work for us is where the rubber really hits the road, and we've done a lot of work there, and I think there's more to come. It's been expensive, but it's very worthwhile, and I think for our students, they are benefiting from that. Now, I will make one comment that is we're unique. San Antonio has been a very strong economy, so that means 1/3 of our revenue originally came from property tax revenue, support facilities. It's now mitigated for state funding declines. It's allowed us to keep our tuition lower because the same rate, because of taxable asset value growth, has produced more revenue. So many other college systems out there are probably in a different place than we were. That's what allowed us in these 5 years to go as fast and as big as we did. I think for others, it might be a little bit slower to do maybe some of the intentional investments that you might have been in.
Awesome, thank you. I want to use our last couple of minutes to take a few questions from the audience. Bill, I'm going to send this first question to you. So the question is about if you're a new college, where do you start with this work? And I'm wondering if you can speak to some of the, the lower cost strategies Cleveland State used in the beginning to generate buy-in and engagement. And also, how did you approach people who are more resistant to some of these reforms? How did you make the case?
Well, we were fortunate in that we did participate in the first cohort of the Pathways Project. And so we worked on this over a course of 2 years, 6 different institutes, engaged a lot of different folks in the conversation. And even if you're not doing something like the Pathways Project, it really is about engaging your faculty and staff in that conversation and realizing it's going to take time for this to occur, to take things to scale. But I'll tell you, probably the most important thing that we learned is that implementing and paying for pathways is not just something that you implement a series of programs. We're talking about institutional change. We're talking about institutional cultural change. And changing your attitude doesn't cost anything. But it really has to be an all-consuming kind of process where you need to develop the buy-in from your faculty and staff. And the best way to do that is engage them in that process, break it down so that people can get involved in that. Because what I saw that really made the biggest difference over time is it wasn't just the president or the administration saying, hey, we need to do this, but we developed a buy-in such that faculty and staff were coming up with their own ideas and initiatives and saying, hey, I think this will really help with pathways. And it's great to say, sure, go make it happen. And so those kinds of things don't cost. And so to me, it's about developing that leadership and sense of culture that engenders more initiatives.
Awesome. And Charles, can you speak to how a college might go about this work in a collective bargaining environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to, well, one, just make sure that you've got your faculty and staff members driving the change, not just from a buy-in perspective, but because it's the only way that it'll actually get done, because they actually know the details of what's required to make it work. And I would make sure that that's very clear up front too. The other thing is, to the extent that you can, and I know every environment is so different in this regard, including the Chicago example, the New Hampshire example, and my own professional experiences, try to divorce some of the collective bargaining aspects, the drives for, equitable pay, and being able to, afford all these changes, and then the student success agenda. What you don't want is for some reason there to be a conflation between what you're trying to do with these proposed reforms, and the ability to pay the people who are leading them. The last thing I would say, and this is actually a very important cost that I think is true for most community colleges, and I don't know if we really brought it up yet, is you have to compensate your adjunct faculty, and train them, because so many of the gateway courses that we talk about are very often taught by the most transient employees that you've got, which is, a shame and something for, another discussion. But these are very good instructors, very good professors, and I think it's critical that, since the professional development dollars are usually outside of what you have to do, and you have to come up with stipends and pay for overtime and stuff, to find a way to do that so adjuncts are fully bought in, because you're going to have so many of the students that you're trying to impact in their courses.
Thanks, Charles. That's a good transition to a teaching and learning question. We note in the report that colleges are not as far along in their teaching and learning work as part of the guided pathways model. That's my cat chiming in. But Diane, I wanted to ask you about how the Alamo Colleges are directing resources to support reforms related to teaching and learning. And I know one thing, if you'd like to talk about this, is the move towards the Alamo experience and ensuring that every student in the college has some experiential learning experience.
Yes, I know I'm probably not the one most expert being in the CFO side, but that has been one of the strategies that we have been, even the last few years, much more intentional about how we provide that experience for our students to have. We've always had a work experience component and other things. We've gotten grants for some of those to do internships, but now to being much more intentional to say, no, every student that is with us, we need to create that opportunity. And that work is really intentionally happening with our faculty, primarily in a lot of the workforce ones, but in addition, in the other areas, to make that part of the thought process of the entire program, and how can that be there. But I'm probably not the most expert to talk about the details of that. I did notice just one point, and there was one question that was also in the chat, questions about our summer momentum program. I thought I'd just mention it briefly. We had started this probably about 4 years ago, where, again, the summer melt, losing students over the summer. So we created a tuition strategy, basically to incent students to take summer courses and to stay enrolled continuously. And so if they took at least 18 credit hours fall and spring, they would get 3-hour scholarship for 3 hours in the summer. If they took 24 fall and spring, they'd get two 6 hours, and that would get them on a 2-year path. That has been tremendous for us. It has really delivered a much higher percent of persistence, and this year's the first year we'll be able to really look at our graduation rates and how that works. But anyone that needs information, feel free to reach out.
Awesome. So I think we need to start wrapping up. I just wanted to see if any of you had any last comments or words of advice for our audience. So Bill, I'll start with you if you have any closing words.
The thing that really comes to me is, don't let the cost scare you away from doing what is the right thing. it's clear that Alamo Colleges probably was much more intentional and ran the numbers better than we did. And there's lots of different ways to approach that. But I started out by saying that you really need to understand that you have to change how you do business, and it's all about student success. We changed from an attitude that I think was pretty much characterized as we were teaching what faculty wanted to teach when they wanted to teach it. Now we say we're a college that teaches what students need when they need it. And that has shaped our approach on planning tremendously. So sometimes you got to wrestle with those old traditions and ways of thinking about things to get past those. And so that has to be part of the overall planning too.
Thank you. Yeah, that aligns with what Charles mentioned earlier about the scheduling being such a big and important part of this work. Charles, any last words?
I would just say, I think that during the pandemic, everybody's dealing with what feels to be existential crises to their organization in terms of dropping appropriations from the state level, in terms of enrollment decline hitting at the same time that you've got this huge spike in expenses. And I would say that it's at that time that actually the student GPS reforms of making sure that students are able to have strong purpose and get through and be supported and are structured. Those were built for the minor versions of the challenges that we're talking about. And now is in fact the time to hit the accelerator on those things and not, I don't want to say not worry about the cost, but like figure out how you're going to pay for it. Because if you don't, you're going to not meet the moment.
Thank you. And Diane, any last words of advice?
Well, to add to that one comment, I think in our budget process, we've always been more of a workload allocation model to our colleges based on where the students are, what our projections are. But we also, what I would encourage you to do, we made a strategic move to set aside $2 million in our budget. That was a hard move. It put more pressure elsewhere, but we put $2 million to College Student Success Fund, and that was for these enterprise-wide strategies. And the board was quite proud of us doing that and continue to keep visibility to the momentum that we were able to accomplish by just setting aside and making it purposeful. And I would encourage that to be part of your process.
Great. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Davis, do you have any last words?
Well, Charles, you did make me look bad. So thank you for that excellent panel, our colleagues. Very inspiring in some tough times. I want to thank our panelists and thank everyone who participated in the audience and for the questions. We tried to find answers. If we didn't answer your questions adequately, you know where to reach us. And we're going to post a longer version of the presentation I made with more detailed findings, as well as the recording on our website. And we're going to also send out the PowerPoint, the more detailed one, to all the participants. So thank you for what you're doing for student success. If CCRC can be of help, let us know. Have a good day and be well.